see anybody. All I can see is my screen presentation.
We're
Okay. Thank you
we're
so
live
much.
now. We can see you.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our educational webinar, proudly hosted by International Trade Council. My name is Anne, and I am delighted to be your host today. Before we dive into the heart of today's session, let's quickly ensure our technical setup is perfect. Could you kindly type yes in the chat box if my voice is clear and the presentation is visible to everyone? Let's take a brief moment for everyone to respond for it. Thank you so much, everyone. So, okay, thank you for confirming everything is in order. So, today's session promises to be both enlightening and engaging, focusing on critical intercultural strategies in increasingly multicultural work environments. This webinar will focus on culture, how deeply it impacts our individual actions, and how culture impacts all types of business relationships. Attendees will learn the need for emotional intelligence and intercultural interaction and how it affects communication in diverse business negotiation and workplace environments. And also, tips on preparing for and managing multicultural meetings will be shared. So, we're honored to have Lynn Cole, the CEO and founder of the BRDGS Academy, as our distinguished speaker. So, Lincoln brings a wealth of knowledge and insight that we're all eager to learn from. So, without further delay, I'll hand over the virtual stage to Miss Lincoln, okay? You can start now.
Thank you. I appreciate that, lady. Greetings, everyone, my ITC Council colleagues. I'd like to start my presentation with you now, but please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat room box because we tend to forget them if we don't ask them at the time. And then we'll have some time at the end of this to go over your questions, and I hope to be able to give you your answers. All right, let's look at this screen first. What is it? I saw this first as a advertisement for a large bank in the Hong Kong airport. I looked at that and I thought, that's kind of strange. My background is as an attorney and for the past many years as a mediator and now as a CEO of this intercultural online and global training program. So I looked at this, and as a Westerner, I can tell you what I saw. I saw a grasshopper. I saw a pest. But if you were from China, you would not see that as a pest. You might see it if you were from a particular province as a pet. However, if you were from Thailand, you might see it as an appetizer, and actually a delicious appetizer. People see things differently through their own cultural lenses. So for today, what we'll do is we'll talk about culture. What is culture? Then we're going to talk a little bit about what intercultural skills are critically needed in the workplace today. And I'll give you lastly an overall view of what that knowledge and those skills are. Most people think of culture as dancing, a dress, a different type of food, a language. It is all of that, but it's so much more than that. It's our values. It's a set of knowledge facts. It's a set of life goals. It's a set of how you view time. It's how you treat others in your society, your roles and responsibilities in societies. It's very much of a belief system and built on tribal and culture. It's a little bit more of what it is. It's a collective programming of the mind. Some might say, and even an indoctrination and way of life. It includes all the communications and the way we communicate. It's a cultivated behavior. In fact, it's the total sum of learned behavior shared by generations. The study of culture is very new. It started in the late 1990s with Hofstede, and I'll mention him later on today, moved into the 2000s. But the study of culture, the actual study of it, is really very, very new. There's a new hypothesis on evolution, and that is called the cultural brain hypothesis. That the real driver in the expansion of the human brain was a growing cumulative body of cultural information. Cultural affected our evolution. There is no doubt about that. How we have evolved psychologically, how we have adapted psychologically for acquiring our ideas, beliefs, values, and strategies. This hypothesis suggests that our brains, our human brains, have been selected for their ability to store and to manage information through asocial, which means rejecting or lacking a capacity for social interaction, or through social learning. Comparisons across evolutionary lines suggest that our brain, this brain expansion, actually may be a part of a larger trend toward larger and more complex brains. It's a fascinating study and one that I'm very interested in continuing to learn about. So, for example, our brains are good at acquiring story. We know that. When man invented fire over time, he manipulated it for cooking, and then we got the idea to use fire to cook, and it became a culturally transmitted idea over time, actually over many millions of years. What this hypothesis suggests is that it affected our biology by making our brains bigger. It made our stomach smaller, our teeth smaller. It altered our length of our intestines. You see, we as human beings have extraordinarily large brains. Did you know that over millions of years, our brains have tripled in size? No other animal's brains have made that significant increase over millennia. To scientists, this increase in our brain size is somewhat puzzling because our brain is energetically expensive. In other words, we expend a lot of calories to use our brain, so a smaller brain is easier to maintain in terms of calories. So this theory relies on the idea that brains expand to store and manage more information, and our brains expand in response to the availability of additional information and more calories. So this is where this theory presented in an analytic way in a computational model explains the increases in brain size. The study of cultural neuroscience is also brand new. It's only 5 years old, and they're still learning it. And they're learning it by the use of imaging brain activity, functional magnetic resonance imaging. They're studying the brain through MRIs, functional MRIs. How does that happen? They come up with specific questions that they have scientifically prepared and ask that to different cultural groups, members of different cultural groups. So let me give you an example. When they ask, for example, an American whether he thinks he is honest, they're taking an image of his brain and how it reacts to that question. His brain activity looks very different than when he thinks about whether another person is honest, even when it's a close relative. Now, when they took the same question and posited to a Chinese person, and they watched his brain reaction, the Chinese man evaluated whether he was honest. Well, his brain activity looked almost identical to when he was thinking about whether his mother is honest. So that finding between the American and the Chinese brain functioning differently, when you consider that trait, okay, There may be those different traits within cultures. We, as the beginning scientific knowledge posits, we are at the edge of a change in our cultural paradigms. We're at the beginning of opening the gates to a culture that will provide a new vision of humanity and society based upon how the brain works under positive evolution, the perspective of evolution, excuse me. When we look at culture, we're not just looking at one big cultural thing. Culture evolves. Culture has pieces. One thing we must remember when we're studying culture, we are not looking at the individual. I know I gave you an example of an individual brain study, but that is an empirical study of a collection of lots and lots of data. We are not looking at the individual. We are looking at societal traits. And within society, we have different things happening. We have cultural stereotyping. Somebody has an opinion about what somebody else is going to think or say or speak because of that individual's difference in culture. Or we might even see in our own cultures, and I know we see this in the United States, cultural ethnocentrism. And that's where you judge another culture and you think that your standards from your own culture are much better than others. We've all known that to happen and seen that, I'm sure, in our own cultures. One other aspect of culture I want to mention briefly, and I mention it because Bridges Academy has a mission of training cultural skills and knowledge to conflict resolvers around the world. We do so in global classrooms, and we do it in an interactive method. So when we're teaching interactively, we have people in our classroom sharing through their own cultural lenses, which is unbelievably exciting and interesting. But Bridges' vision is to be a very small part, but a part of a larger culture to build a culture of world peace. Acculturation is when you have the mixing of cultures in a positive way. You have that societal cultural diversity in a good way, in a way that assimilates new ideas into an existing cognitive structure, but it is done so with respect, so that you can actually have cultures within cultures living with each other in a very positive way. The main goal for today is to hopefully earn your belief that intercultural skills are no longer optional. In business, we're going to have cultural conflict resolvers of all types. We have it in team leaders. We have it in the hierarchy of our organization. We have it in boardrooms. We have it certainly in HR. We have it in the workplace all the time. And it comes around because we need to understand what's going on in our business environments with additional diverse cultural environments that have ethnic differences, ethical preferences, and different social codes. There's a rapid expansion of international and commercial disputes without litigation. It's called mediation. It's called arbitration. And these are all, as a mediator and arbitrator, I do that as another activity in my profession. These are expanding worldwide. You have international and multicultural companies that have arbitrations and mediations that are conducted on a worldwide basis interculturally. You have fewer commercial transactions tied to national boundaries, certainly not banks. Or if you have banks, you have intermediary banks that communicate with other banks all over the world. You have businesses and business projects that extend over long periods of time with greater complexities. You see international business transacting all types of cooperative ventures, relationships, technical and social partnerships. And when we're doing this and our world is shrinking business-wise, financial-wise, trade-wise, all of this is happening when we're conducting business across and among diverse cultures and within countries with political instabilities, wildly fluctuating economic variables, and obviously conflicting ideologies. We have cultural difference expressed in today's negotiation and business disputes nationally versus regional. We have them involving religious views and traditions, linguistic variables, generational customs, social and class norms and deviations, and ethical preferences. Communications across cultures must increase and is increasing exponentially, and it's doing so and has been doing so with social media. I have a grandson, and although he's young, he loves to call himself a gamer. And when he does that, he is playing games with his age group from all over the world. It's an amazing thing to watch as they do this because although they all speak English, you can watch and see how different people in that group react differently in a game. Literally, the internet, now robotics, and certainly artificial intelligence is going to shrink our world even more so and in a more rapid pace. Literally, the success of business and resolving conflicts and negotiating with business is going to be done by transcending all of these potential cultural barriers. Recent studies have shown that having diverse cultures within business is a very positive thing. The Pew Research Center show that a majority of workers, if you add a good thing, 56%, and neither good or bad at 28, you got a 96% of employed adults saying that in general, it's a really good thing. It's a good thing. It's okay to have a general focus or increased diversity and equity and inclusion in the workplace. Harvard ran a study, that's the one on the right-hand side, to show the benefits of diversity in the workplace. And by a large majority, most thought that there was an advantage in a diverse workplace over a strictly homogeneous workplace. What are some of the benefits in the workplace to cultural diversity? Well, creativity, and innovation. Cultural influences are the way in which we see the world. And so a variety of viewpoints, along with a wide-ranging personal and professional experience interculturally, can offer new perspectives that inspire your colleagues to see the workplace from a different cultural lens, to see it and view it differently, to be challenged by it, to learn by it, to be curious about it. Diversity of thought has been shown to breed creativity and to drive innovation. This helps resolve problems and meet customers' needs in new and exciting ways, to actually develop whole new intercultural markets. Multiple voices, perspectives, and personalities bouncing off one another, that helps to give rise to out-of-the-box thinking. Offer a platform for the open exchange of ideas where businesses can reap the biggest benefits of diversity in the workplace. In terms of market, what's a local market anymore? Do we really have them? Aren't they regional, and aren't they becoming multicultural, international? A multicultural workforce can give an organization an important edge when expanding into new markets. Often a product or services need to be adapted to this new market to succeed. So understanding local rules, regulations, and customs, as well as a competitive landscape, can help a business to thrive when it's developing new markets. Moreover, when you have a diverse workplace and work like let's say you have an intercultural team leading this market expansion, they're going to have local connections, native language skills, and cultural understanding, which can boost that development. Diverse cultural environment within business also. According to a Glassdoor survey, 2/3 of job hunters indicated that diversity was important to them when evaluating companies and job offers. In a competitive global market, demonstrating that your business is invested, I mean fully invested, if not even partially or at least beginning to be invested in fostering a multicultural and inclusive environment, can make you stand out to the right candidates. There are going to be good people out there who might be culturally different than others who are interviewing them. Making an adversity and hiring these kind of people and being interviewed by a company appreciating diversity, that's an important part of recruiting process, and it can broaden your talent pool of prospective employees. Not only does hiring from a more diverse talent pool make your business attractive, certainly more attractive to maybe global-minded candidates, it also helps you keep them on board, keeps them there. Diversity, including diversity in gender, religion, and ethnicity, has been shown to improve retention and reduce the costs within the company by reducing employee turnover. He said that in a diverse workplace, employees are more likely to remain loyal when they feel respected and valued for their unique contribution. This, in turn, fosters mutual respect among colleagues who also value the diverse culture and perspectives. Cultural diversity is a benefit in the workplace because it will attract talented, ambitious, and globally minded professionals who appreciate that personal and professional perspective. Cross-cultural marketing is important and is happening all the time. It's a growing industry. It lends itself to the production of more effective marketing strategies and materials when you have a diverse workplace and a good, diverse marketing team. High quality and culturally sensitive transactions on websites, brochures, and other marketing assets are important. It can't be overlooked. And a native speaker can be that cultural member from that culture can be extremely important. Sometimes even brand likes can be lost in the translation. I'll just give you one interesting example. KFC moved into China, and as you know, their tagline is "finger licking good." Unfortunately for them, they found out, and fortunately they did find out rather quickly, that translated by the Chinese, it meant eat your fingers off. So it's really important you don't make those initial mistakes. Market-specific knowledge and insights are invaluable when it comes to imagery and design. What might work in a British company, what might work in a billboard for a British company could fail elsewhere. Cultural diversity offers a broader range of products and attracts and retains the best talent. Globally oriented companies can add to their service range by leveraging the skills and experiences of their international employees, because they bring to the table these kinds of different skills. A broader skill base and a more potentially diverse workforce offers products and services. It gives you a competitive advantage. I think in today's volatile and fast-growing business environment, nimble and adaptable organizations are going to be the ones that thrive. And adaptability means faster and more effective planning and development and execution. A company with a good culture and cognitive diversity can be quicker to spot a gap in the market. It will have that global advantage to get in there and use that to change and meet consumer behavior and succeed. Of course, there are some other benefits, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in understanding communications and why intercultural communications are no longer optional. Because misunderstanding cultural values and traditions and practices can cause misunderstandings, embarrassments, increased sensitivity, or confusion. I spent almost 15 years as a mediator specialist subcontractor with USAID. I lived and worked in different countries developing their judicial or non-judicial mediation programs. Those countries included Bulgaria, Kosovo, not too long after they were still suffering from the effects of the war, Jordan, where I learned to speak some Arabic language, which is a beautiful language, and lastly, Sri Lanka. Before I went to my first assignment in Bulgaria, I tried to understand what was I going into, what was the culture. Well, I could learn a lot about the demographics, I could learn about trade, I could learn about the economics, I could learn about the geography, I could learn about the capital cities and see pictures, but what I couldn't learn about was the culture. There was nobody who showed me the way, the process of learning about culture. I arrived in Sofia, Bulgaria one night, and the next morning I attended a huge meeting with the heads of all the NGOs in the country seated at the table to talk about mediation. I was introduced, and I had fortunately learned a couple words like Vlagodaria for thank you in Bulgarian. And then someone asked me an initial question, and I knew the answer, and I smiled, and I said, shook my head, yes. The room burst into laughter. Why? Because this means in Bulgarian, no. This means yes. I wish I could have known that. It was a little embarrassing and disconcerting at the time, but fortunately, it amused everybody. It didn't offset people. Diversity and bringing it into the business workplace has challenges. I'll go over just a few of them. For example, you might have people in a team or in a business meeting whose voices are less likely to be heard than others because of their culture. It's important to create an open and inclusive workplace environment so that all team members feel empowered to contribute. But it may be particularly challenging because in some cultures, and I'll talk about this very briefly in just a bit, they have a much more indirect way of communicating. They defer to others. They have worked in their own culture, business where hierarchy is important. So they don't feel the need, they don't feel like as equal as others do to be heard. Of course, you might also find that there is prejudice in the environment. That's going to have to be talked about and worked with. That's why it's so important that human relations and that you has had hopefully at least some cultural training, and that cultural training is hopefully spread throughout the business. Prejudice underlies working between others just because the way you work together with people from different cultures can be uncomfortable for some people. They may see their colleague from a different culture in a stereotypical way, as we talked about. Although there are stereotypes, that I'm not saying that all stereotypes are negative, but it's the notion that because you are from that culture, you have certain things about you that is can work into a prejudice, and those prejudices sometimes may not be expressed, they may be implicit. The person holding those prejudices sometimes doesn't even understand it when they're working and expressing them, that they are doing it in an unconscious way. They're expressing that bias or prejudice. So misinterpretations occur, and sometimes there's difficulty in understanding as well. Sometimes a little bit of humor is the best way to diffuse that negativity. Um, Misinterpretations can happen. The best way is to be a good fellow about it, be a good sport about it. But the most important thing about it is together in a business team, you're looking as a positive way to learn. You might find it challenging because there are different business ethics and professional ethics. For example, if you're going into a meeting with perhaps a meeting with the Japanese, they come from a business where hierarchy is very important. Therefore, seating at the table is very important. Showing your business card is a professional ethic in some cultures. Bowing is a professional ethic, and how you present that business card is important to understand. All of these things are challenges in the workplace. So then the question becomes, what do you teach? What are we looking to learn about culture that will help us in the workplace? Let's look at a quick definition of what intercultural skills is. It is the effective transmission of messages and priorities from members of one culture or social group to others, exchanging of ideas, information, and communications between peoples of different cultures. And here's key. It's about learning relevant knowledge and skills. And importantly, it's about learning a process of non-judgment and understanding. It is not about defining an individual, but it is about learning those things about a society that may be evidenced from an individual with whom you're working, and understanding that, accepting it, and being willing to learn from it. What's becoming culturally adept? Again, gaining that knowledge and skills. When we designed our Intercultural Business Certificate, which is a 20-hour credit course, we collected all the information from the academics at the International Mediation Institute, which had done a lot of studies as an international organization, a lot of studies on culture. And what they put together was a phenomenal, extensively researched training program from which we took most of our training ideas. So we trained first in cultural dimensions. I train in that, and it's an interesting 4-hour course. It is a knowledge course. Once you get that knowledge, then we move into the skills, looking at different skills. And those are intercultural communications. It's about emotional intelligence, knowing yourself, having your own self-awareness. And importantly, it's about preparing and managing your negotiation process, your business process, your learning process, your team process in business. I mentioned before Gerd Hofstede. He's the first one who ever talked about cultural dimensions. As I said, learning about culture is a relatively new science. It's only altogether about 20 years old, maybe 25 now. But what Hofstede said was, he did humongously extensive studies around the world with businesses, and he came up with 6 different dimensions. And in those dimensions, he used them to describe society's values and how these values relate to a society's general behavior. Again, not individually, but society's general behavior. He talked about power distance and how that varies, and that's an important variable in business. He talked about collectivism versus individualism. That's important. Remember when I told you about that image, that the first image that they had done between the American and his degree of honesty and how he valued that, in the Chinese man's brain image, when asked the same question, he not only valued his honesty but that of his mother. Okay, that might be an indication of a trait in collectivism versus individualism, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. Another dimension is uncertainty avoidance. Another dimension is femininity and masculinity. I would say, that in terms of dimensions, this cultural dimension has had the greatest and most rapidly increasing changes around the world. In some cultures, there's very little change in that. In other cultures, there have been some very distinctive and ongoing and importantly defined changes. Another dimension is long-term orientation. And the last is indulgent versus restrained orientation. So what I want to do with you today is just take a very brief look, as an example of a dimension, at collectivism versus individualism. And I say this because we mentioned that we had a slide that tended to show that earlier in my talk. The darker purple in this slide shows individualism. The lighter shows more collectivism. And you can see in the United States, Canada, in Europe, in Australia, in South Africa a little bit, you'll see a lot of individualism. What does that mean? Well, it means that people feel more independent. Individualism is the extent to which people feel independent as opposed to being interdependent as members of larger wholes. Now, individualism does not mean egoism in this context. It means that individual choices and decisions are expected within that society. Within individualistic cultures, people are more likely to see themselves as separate from others. They're more likely to define themselves based upon personal traits, and they see their characteristics as relatively changing and unchanging and stable. An individualistic sense of self is defined more by who they are on the inside, minimizing the influence of factors, context, and people outside of the individual. In a collectivist society, and here you see more in the Asian societies, some in Russia, some in South America, some in Mexico. Excuse me. Collectivism stresses the importance of the community, not the individual. Although the individual rights of each person may be protected, the importance is for the community. Collectivism does not mean closeness. Excuse me. It means that one knows one's place in life. And that place in life is determined socially. So there you see one dimension talked about. Please excuse me. Let's talk for a moment now about the skills. What kind of skills do you need to learn to become culturally adept? And again, these are more process skills. So we'll talk first about self-awareness, or what we call emotional intelligence. That's our 4-hour course, and it's taught by others as well. And it focuses on self-awareness, self-reflection, and self-regulation. We found that emotional intelligence is very, very important when working in multicultural environments. We found that there's often the possibility that people in multicultural situations are often triggered by the differences in cultures. Learning how to handle those triggers, first of all, being aware of them is important. Immediately assessing what that trigger is and then regulating that trigger is really important in the interactive portion of meetings in cultures, between cultures. Most of us tend to view others' experience through the prism and the lens of our own cultural experiences. We have the power to purposefully use our emotions to enhance the quality of the process, to enhance our multicultural environments and our communications in those environments. We can tune in and adjust our responses. We can keep the focus of the conflict resolution on the participants. Importantly, in learning about emotional intelligence, you learn how to be very present for the parties. And you learn through exercises how to be aware of your own emotions, which drive your behavior, which behavior may impact others either positively or negatively. And through that emotional intelligence, you can pick that up, whether you're being heard positively or negatively. Having that self-awareness and those self-awareness strategies allows you to avoid surprises in that multicultural environment, to reestablish your self-balance, to cope with potential cultural ambiguities, and to anticipate unfamiliar practices. That's what happens with people who are inculcated in your work environment from other cultures. An important other cultural skill is preparing for and managing the process. This is, in this learning environment, preparing and managing the process, multicultural process, you recognize culturally shaped perspective in behaviors or events, above all else, from the multicultural perspective. When you build teams in business, you manage every element of your business. To manage a diverse workplace, you need in an organization to ensure that you're effectively communicating with your employees. Policies, safety rules, and other important information should be designed to be very carefully suited to everyone, regardless of their culture. Honing your ability to recognize in others their cultural safe perspectives is important. Managing ambiguities and mistakes is important. When I made my mistake and shook my head yes for no in Bulgaria, everyone laughed and so did I. And humor is a really good way to learn, and the best way to make friends in the learning process as well. And being sensitive to others' perspectives. In order to do this, you have to have mutual respects, balance autonomy, balance your affiliation, time allocations, and I want to give you just a few tips. The signposts or impediments often in a multicultural process are not obvious. For example, you may need to be less directive and more facilitative in your meetings. If you find that someone is from another culture is not participating as much as others, is certainly holding back. Be sensitive to that. Don't force him or he into a situation where they may be more uncomfortable. Understand that perspective from them and work on that in perhaps in a more independent, individually private way. Align your parties on expectations. That means go over them and so that everyone knows what page they should be on. Assist the parties in setting their action items. The order in which people set action items is different in cultures. And that those cultural differences may be important for you to recognize when you're setting action items in your business. Take any additional necessary procedures or ceremonies. Even when we train in our intercultural courses, there's a 4-hour course. And if we find that we have someone who needs to take a religious break for a prayer, we take that time and do that. And we all learn from that. We'll talk now about intercultural communications. It's probably one of the most critical behavior areas that culture can impact in business and negotiations. And that's because there's so many different ways of communicating in culture based upon your culture. What has been found is that there are, I've listed for you the different ways that the communication styles vary. First is the formal versus the informal. Next is the direct versus the indirect. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that because it goes more along in line with the cultural dimension I talked about with individualism versus collectivism. Emotional, there's a high and a low. Emotional expressiveness, very big part of communication. What people mostly forget a lot about is verbal versus nonverbal, personal versus impersonal, sequential versus circular. What we also teach you in communications is probably the very most important element of communication. It's none of those below. Frankly, the most important element of communication is listening and hearing, and we teach you how to do that as well. Let's take a look, if we can, at the direct communication styles. We'll look at the direct versus indirect communication styles. So the direct communication speakers tend to say exactly what they think, tend to convince others that they're right, in a good way, clear, definitive statements. They tend to participate actively in meetings, and they tend to make their points with conviction. When we looked at that initial chart on collectivism versus individualism, you could see that the countries that were darker were more individual in America, Australia, some European countries, and Canada. And that is true of those in these more individualistic societies. There is a direct link. The speakers tend to be more direct, and that includes Germany and Israel as well. This is my last slide, and I'm going to go over with you, and it talks a little bit more about the direct versus the indirect. And I wanted to just give you a few more examples of the direct versus indirect. The indirect is stresses that if the truth might hurt, you soften it, or sometimes you don't even say it, or say it in a way that it can be said more obliquely, or where you can read between the lines. You handle communication very often to save face. You would not ever, ever do anything that would intentionally embarrass or in any way look badly upon anyone in your immediate group. Small talk before business is important. Why? Because in certain societies, that is a necessary way of introducing yourself, of becoming comfortable with one another. Criticism is done very, very carefully and oftentimes is unspoken. These are just some of the more indirect ways versus the direct ways of communicating. So here's a last slide for you. The question isn't how to help others become more culturally based in their perspectives to avoid their limitations. Rather, the question is how to discover cultural overlaps, common issues, and common assets. And it's my belief that in the doing of this, you satisfy one's curiosity, you learn, you adapt, you become skilled in ways you hadn't thought of before. You don't opt you opt in and you opt out in good ways. You are interested in learning and you do so with non-judgmental attitude and with respect. So from all of us who train at Bridges Academy and Intercultural Skills to you, we say thank you and we ask that you join our evolution, embrace diversity, and learn how to harness its energies.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Lean. I really appreciate that. So it's now the time to delve into your question. Please continue to type them into the Q&A tab or the chat box. I'll be selecting a few for Lean Cole to answer live. Let's make this interactive and insightful for everyone, okay? So I have one here. So here, hi Lynn. My question is how can organizations effectively implement critical intercultural strategies to navigate and foster cohesion in the context of increasingly diverse work environments? Thanks.
Okay, if you could repeat the last half of that question, I would be grateful. Thank you. The last half of that question.
Uh,
How,
um,
I know. How do you integrate your organization? And then what was the ending part of that question,
okay,
please?
so the question is how can organization effectively implement critical intercultural strategies to navigate and foster cohesion in the context of increasingly diverse work environments?
Okay. Well, one of the things that's why I'm here teaching is I think it's because you should implement I think a training package for new employees should always have that a component for intercultural skills. Um, and whether that's either a reading package or a learning package or an introductory skills seminar, I think that's really important. Um, the thing is to bring it to their attention because and to show them the benefits. Those and how you do that in an organization can differ. As I said, you can use training packages, marketing skills, morning marketing, or actually have HR do some of your learning skills. You can bring in outside consultants to do training. Sometimes in different teams, you can have the team leader will want to bring in to talk about intercultural skills at an inception, for example, so that that's part of the team building process.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn. I also see one question here. So here, in your experience, what are the most effective intercultural strategies that organizations can implement to foster collaboration and innovation in increasingly diverse work environments?
It goes way back. Let me take you way back. I was putting my husband through Harvard Business School, and I was working in a women's college, and I was the director of placement. And we had an issue come up with some of the African American women there who felt they were being not being treated well. We set up an African festival so that everyone in the school could be brought in to learn African dances, African foods, African interpretations, African mysticism, African beliefs, and have a great time in doing it. So you can create an environment, an experience for people. It doesn't have to be just here, learn this. Actually have them learn. Have them learn a dance in a folk tradition. Have them try on a different costume in doing that in the tradition of that culture. Um, there are many ways to do it, but the important thing is to do it. And in the process of doing that, stress that it is not about the individual. That's number one. The second thing to stress is that culture is always evolving. It is evolving in different ways, and everybody, including your business and your business teams, can be a part of that.
Thank you so much for that, Lynn. So, um, before we wrap up, I'd like to share a few important announcements for everyone. So, today's session has been recorded and will be accessible in the ITC YouTube channel. It's a great resource to revisit or share within your networks. And aside from that, for those not yet members of the ITC, today's webinar attendance qualifies for you a free membership. Don't miss out on this opportunity to join our company. And also, participants will receive a certificate of participation. Please watch your email over the next few days or for more information. So, Lynn, do you have any final thoughts that you wanted to say about your presentation?
Yes, we're starting to offer our courses on May 8th. I teach cultural dimensions. We are all online. So you can do it from the comfort of your own home or your office. We try and do them at teach our courses. We also have one part of the course which is taught on Saturday mornings, knowing that business is important. I'd invite all of you, if you want to take one of our courses, please put my website out there, and it would be my honor to invite you to take one of our courses at a discount. All you have to do is contact me, and I would look forward to meeting you and having further discussions with you. I'm very interested in this whole idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. So, if any attendees wish to contact you regarding this presentation, could you please also type in your email address in the chat box so they can connect you anytime for that. So I will also provide my email address in the chat box for those who are not yet a member of International Trade Council. Feel free to leave a message in my inbox. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Lynn. Oh well, like we mentioned to you earlier, we were asking for your presentation or PowerPoint to be sent with Ron Nolasco. Is that if it's okay?
I'm happy to share it with you all.
Okay. So okay, I really appreciate you with this, Lean. A massive thank you goes out to you for your expert insight today, and to all our participants. Thank you for your active involvement and thoughtful questions. Your engagement truly enriches our webinars. So don't forget to check your email for follow up information, including how to claim your certificate. We wish you a wonderful afternoon and look forward to welcoming you to a future webinar. Goodbye for now, guys. Bye.